I'd like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land where we're filming today. Now, we're going to touch on a really meaty topic today, navigating workplace politics. Are you guys ready?
Definitely.
Let's do it. Now, workplace politics can be a killer for morale, for productivity and engagement. It's often the informal power structures such as influence, relationship, even tenure in an organisation that has the potential to be destructive. Now, if managed badly, it can lead to high turnover, stagnant growth and bad reputation. But if managed well, it can drive innovation, better work satisfaction and business growth. To help me tackle the topic today, I've got three brilliant journalists here, which I'm going to introduce you to. Firstly, Anton Brown. So Anton's got over 20 years of customer-centric leadership spanning 4 continents. Anton has managed diverse portfolios including HR, marketing, professional sports clubs and more. He's adept at customer experience, product, brand, marketing and PR alongside data analytics and insights generation and nurturing high-performing teams. Anton's superpower lies in unifying teams to deliver value through insights, often resulting in transformative outcomes. He's earned an MBA and is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and has worked with iconic organisations like Virgin and Cricket New South Wales and is currently a non-executive director at Basketball New South Wales. Welcome, Anton.
Thank you, Amanda.
Next, we've got Sandy Bains. So Sandy is a strategic advisor to businesses across corporate Australia. She brings over 2 decades of experience across strategy, operations, risk management and commercial domains, delivering strategic outcomes at industry giants such as EY and Scentre Group, owner of Westfield Shopping Centres. Most recently, Sandy has immersed herself in the Australian technology ecosystem, spearheading strategy, operations and sustainability for logistics tech player ShipIt. She's also a first believer with venture capitalist firm Startmate and using her experience to support and back Australian founders who are shaping future innovation. A passionate advocate for diversity, equality and inclusion, Sandy is committed to shattering barriers and fostering a more equitable business landscape in Australia. Her insights, backed by a wealth of experience, make her a compelling voice for change. Welcome, Sandy.
Great to be here.
And last but not least, we've got Tom Willis. Tom is an award-winning marketing leader and the co-founder of Lawpath, Australia's leading online legal and compliance platform. His entrepreneurial journey includes steering various projects and tackling the unique challenges faced by small businesses. As Chief Marketing Officer at Lawpath, Tom has been pivotal in shaping the company's go-to-market strategy, helping over 450,000 Australian businesses start, grow and succeed. With a passion for business growth, he's also conducted over 250 marketing workshops, interviewed over 100 of Australia's top marketing leaders. Tom is a B&T 30 under 30 winner and was also recognised as one of Australia's top 100 young entrepreneurs. Oh, congratulations, Tom.
Thank you.
And welcome.
Thanks, Amanda.
All right, let's get started. I'm going to throw an easy question at you to start off with. Can you all talk to me about what your work-life superpower is, or what I like to call your unique advantage? Now, Anton, I know you've already mentioned that in your bio. Is there anything else that you want to add?
I would say spending a lot of time at different organisations. The topic today, I reframe it often when I go into organisations because I'm often there around transformation. And for me, politics is really, workplace politics is often about culture. And so the opportunities that I get involved in is changing cultures. And so it's a transformation of getting out of those negative or toxic cultures, if they exist, into something where I use the term shared value. And if I can get to a place where everybody's thinking about shared value, that's between the value that they create for the organisation and their place in it, what the organisation's place is in creating value, and then what the customer actually wants. If we get to that intersection of those 3 places, then that's a great place to be in. And my superpower is understanding how to get to that.
Beautiful, thank you. How about you, Sandy?
Well, from the bio that you just read out there, I'm a generalist by nature. I've never really had that one passion in my life that I've followed to the T. But what that has meant is that I've fell in love with problem solving at any level. And so, sort of starting off my career in consulting, you're very much there, not just to solve problems, but to help businesses really articulate and identify what they're trying to achieve. And so I think the superpower really that sits behind all of that is active listening and making sure that you can articulate what a business is actually trying to achieve. And more often than not, and I think Anton, you've already alluded to it, there's always an element of culture in any problem that you're trying to solve as a business. So I think that's really key, and that's probably the thing that's kind of allowed me to be really curious, is to listen and to be able to understand how the world is operating today and how it might operate in the future, and provide some guidance around that.
Thanks, Sandy. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, for me, I think that one thing I've always really prided myself on is being able to bring a lot of people together to make a decision, make a fast decision that everyone's unified on, and then be able to commit to that without any real deviation from that. And so I think when you're working in a startup environment, that's a very important thing. You need to make these fast decisions and really be able to then just say we're moving all in with them, what the next steps of that need to be, because there isn't time to kind of go back and ruminate on that too much. And if I think then into my personal superpower from that, it probably is the fact that I never ruminate on the decision. Once I've made the decision, it's done. I don't think about what could have been, what might have been the alternatives there. We move ahead. And I'm not one of those people who gets kept up all night thinking about what could have been or whatever else. I'm hitting the pillow, I'm asleep, and then wake up, take on the next problem.
Oh, I love that. I need a bit of that. So thank you for sharing. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. If we look at some of the detail, toxic workplace environments are insidious. And if we break that down to what that really costs, it can be everything from employee turnover, which could cost a company 6 months of salary to replace, legal fees, cost of lost productivity and sick leave. I think the Productivity Commission estimated it costing between $12 and $22 billion annually. And of course, reputational damage. I mean, I said I wasn't going to name names, but you look at the backlash with Qantas and PwC are two, clear examples. So if you're comfortable to share, let's get a little bit controversial. And of course, you don't need to name names. What is the spiciest workplace politics situation you've found yourself in? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Go, Sandy.
I think before we sort of jump into the actual example, I think that my reflection on workplace toxicity is that it can happen very quickly. It's not something that can span years and years, and it just becomes the culture and the way things work around here. Of course, that is symptoms of bad workplace culture. But also what I've experienced, in my professional career is one person can really change the culture of an organisation very, very quickly. In an example I'll share is, one leader, very senior, very brilliant, just would outwit me, outplay me in every argument, could never win, and he'd always make me think that, actually that's the right outcome. So just, brilliant. But on the flip side, he was also a real bully, and had this positional power of being the executive that nobody really wanted to stand up to this person. And so what that created in the organisation in a very short amount of time was that people didn't want to work for him, were scared of being able to sort of articulate how they might be feeling. He was a real results financial guy, really wanted just the outcomes that he had articulated. And ultimately what that led to was just people not wanting to turn up to work, people saying, oh, I'll just work from home again today. And it meant that you had to have a whole range of people slowly getting to the executive to say, hey, this behaviour is not appropriate in the workplace. Particularly in 2024, you can't be yelling, screaming, bullying people. to get to the one outcome that you think is the right outcome. And I think my reflection on that, and that person has now sort of exited the business. And again, I would say that the buck stops with the CEO. Like if you're seeing that behaviour, if people are coming to you with that level of angst and anxiety about coming to work every day, then the person that's making the key decisions in the organisations need to really step up, because that goes to the organisation's credibility and to their reputation. So I think that is a watch point for organisations where it can be one person. You might think that they're the brilliant guy in the room, but what else are they doing to the organisation? And I think that saying around rising tide lifts all boats. Well, this person was actually like sinking all the boats and really bringing that tide right down. And in that case, nobody wins. The person that's doing the bullying is not winning, and then no one in the organisation is winning either. So I think it's really important to sort of think about it's not just the entire organisation, but it could just be one person in the organisation that can rapidly change the culture in a very short amount of time.
Great example. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, so being a smaller organisation, I suppose we're only a team of 65, so workplace politics was something I really didn't have too much experience with kind of prior to that, because you're in a position where you know everybody that you're dealing with very well, and you're friends with a lot of them as well, but you're able to kind of get across to how the vibe is and the pulse of everyone. And I remember kind of like more kind of as a general theme, when I remember I went on paternity leave when we just hit about 50 people, had my second child was born, and probably the 2 times that I've really had time off over this journey has been when my children have been born. So it's been an opportunity to kind of step back and think, maybe there are a few things that are problematic in what I'm seeing in the culture at those times. And I think that the graduation of a company to 50 people means that you kind of get to this point then when you're not in every meeting, you're not able to get across every decision. And you find yourself really then seeing that, I suppose, alliances are starting to build, whether that's within teams or within people with different tenures within the organisation. And I remember a specific example when I was away where I thought kind of there's a real act of kind of silent sabotage going on to a degree, where there'd been kind of like 2 teams that were involved in a project, the decision had been made, and one team wasn't particularly happy with how the decision had been made and what was agreed upon. And they didn't really then put their best effort into kind of executing on that. And the whole initiative didn't actually have the desired effect. And it was something we had to kind of, retroactively fit. We did, a big retrospective on it as well. And I think it was just a great instance of where, as you get to a certain size, you obviously you've still got your kind of like North Star in the metrics that you want your organisation to go after, but then everyone else is driven by their own, whether it's their KPIs, their OKRs, or whatever else. And there really then also needs to be a centralised alliance on that as well. Otherwise, you have people saying, well, I'm going off on this journey. Your success in this doesn't attribute to my success on my side of things. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to assist you with the best way I can. And then things end up failing in that respect. So for me, it was a great opportunity to kind of step back and say, all right, we've got to really make sure as part of this, yes, we need teams to be motivated within their own little groups, but at the same time, we also need to make sure that everyone is aligned to what it is that we're trying to do and that we're helping one another. So what can we change operationally to really improve on that?
You said a couple of powerful things. I like the word that you said, silent sabotage. Like is the wrong word for that, but silent sabotage. And I think your business going from startup to a scale-up business, that level of maturity and the skill sets and the attitudes obviously need to morph and change and grow with the organisation. So I appreciate you being open and honest, given that you currently work at the organisation. Anton, what about you? I'm sure you've got a great story to tell.
I have to try and pick which one. And to use Tom's words, we'll redact some of it. So, but it actually turns out into a good news story. So it was early in a big transformation piece, and I just joined the organisation, and this a particular thing happened probably 3 months later, which, and as I joined, we did a restructure, and it restructured pretty much the whole organisation. And I had a lot of senior people reporting into me whose roles had changed, and we had also some new people put in. So there was a lot of uncertainty and people not feeling, probably understanding how they fit into all of the change as early days. So how this transpired was the two senior leaders almost created a bit of a coup, going to the CEO and discussing the things that weren't working for them. And what was great was the CEO came and sat with me and said, look, here's what's going on. How do you want to handle this? And I said, okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing it with me. And then I sat down with each of those leaders individually and leant into it and tried to understand where they were coming from. So that's the first thing for me where there's politics or this cultural change happening, is understanding where people are coming from and what their uncertainties are in that circumstance. And it was a really difficult situation, but it turned out great because it gave me time to reflect on how I was working with them and what information I was giving them and the frameworks that we were putting in place in terms of what success looked like. And it turned out brilliant because we ended up working with their teams and actually understanding more just than their perspectives, what it was their teams were feeling and what they were needing to understand what success looked like in their space. Because the amount of change that had occurred really had created an uncertainty about what the future looked like for them. And that's really, 3 years later, great situation where I have a great relationship with those people, and we can laugh about it. But at the time, it wasn't a laughing piece. But you can completely have to step into the shoes of the other person at that stage, and the way you go about it in terms of chatting to those people directly and listening and hearing where they're coming from means it's not you don't take it personally, and it's not it doesn't feel as though it's an indictment on me personally. It just is something that I need to be aware of as you're managing those workplace relationships and situations.
So it sounds like you handled that really well, and that uncertainty has bred that kind of behaviour. I wonder, what's your view on a healthy level of work politics?
Well, so that's where we're always trying to get to, is having a workplace culture where the politics is positive in that people are helping each other. There's shared value. People don't own just one area. They're actually leaning in and working with other people. There's less of a siloed sort of approach in the way that they're thinking about their turf. It becomes our problem that we're working with. And you can do that, through the way that you're praising people through the work that they're doing, certainty about what their value creation looks like in their space. And often you have to, some of the other topics we're talking about today around kind of how you create what that win looks like is very much around drilling down to the individual person's area and saying, right, okay, in your space, this is all you need to worry about. Success looks like this, and this is how it adds up through to your team, the department, the organisation success. And when you can join those dots together, there's less bias, there's less uncertainty, and there's less worry about change, because, and you were alluding to innovation can occur, because you know what you're needing to do and what value looks like when you're delivering it. You can then start making those decisions yourself in your job around whether you're doing that or not, rather than somebody else telling you you need to do it. And that takes away the power piece if that makes sense. Everybody gets empowered in their own space.
Love that. How about you, Sandy?
I think to Anton's point, everyone is searching for utopia when it comes to, the right balance of workplace politics. I think it has to start with the executive team. That has to be the A team in any business. So it's not the product team that's the best team in the org. It's not the customer team. It is the executive team who should be acting like the A team. So that can actually filter out a lot of noise at a team level, because if you've got a CPO and a CCO working, in harmony together, and they can resolve things at the top and then disseminate those messages down, that makes it a lot easier to cut out a lot of the gossip and the noise and the priorities and all that sort of thing at the sort of mid-management layer. So I think if you can see a collegiate, unified exec team that is working together, that have consistency in messages that they want to share with the organisation, that can be a super strong foundation for a healthy level of politics within the organisation. We certainly don't want it to be all, kumbaya and everything. You want a bit of tension in the organisation, because that's how you drive results and that's how you get better outcomes and you have better conversations. But we want to focus our attention on the right type of conversations in the room. So is this the best product for our customer? Yes or no? Not, did we do this right or wrong, or blame somebody for something that's actually got nothing to do with the end result. So I think really driving that behaviour from the top and having just more, more sophisticated conversations at an exec level really helps drive that culture of high performance across the business.
Great. Now, I think once you're embedded in the culture of organisation, it's almost like a vortex. It's hard not to participate in a lot of those conversations. And I wonder what's within our control. Tom, I might start with you. Have you got any tips and tricks for building advocacy and strong stakeholder relationships in the organisation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably having it more from, I guess, being the stakeholder and people coming to me, but I know the things that I really value within that is, I think, always like a really strong level of kind of transparency on who, when you are talking to somebody about, I guess, a decision on what they're trying to get across, trying to really understand the full picture of things. You can often have situations where someone's like, oh, this person from this team agrees, I agree as well, therefore we need to kind of work through that. And I think at different times you probably need to just stress test that a little bit. I'm someone who trusts until I'm kind of work out that I shouldn't trust, and then it becomes a very difficult thing for me to come back from. But I do think it is also important that you are just, having a way of being able to just check across those things. And I suppose in a smaller organisation, that's relatively easy, just having a conversation with someone to just see, are we aligned on this? Is that where we're at as well? I always look at it from my side. I think for me, everything really comes back to how we can tell these stories and how we can make decisions with data as well. So I think for me, data democratization in an organisation is so important. And one of the things that I always used to get very frustrated with was when, I guess, a team would have access to data and be sharing like a unique data point when another team might not be privy to that or have been across that, and using that as a little bit of a trump card as something to come across. And I really encourage it to be a point that we should all have access to that same data. It should be governed in a way where then we all are looking at it and we're not disputing pieces about that as well. And to get there can be quite a challenging thing, but I think it is something from an early stage you need to be thinking about. This is really going to be the kind of the objective truth in your organisation of what you need to go across. So how can we get this into the hands of as many people as possible so that when we are making these decisions, we're all looking at it through the same lens?
And Anton, how about from your perspective in larger organisations? I think it's quite easy to forge relationships within your existing teams, but outside in larger organisations, it can be quite hard. So any tips and tricks on your side?
Look, every person contributes to the culture in some way of doing things. And so the way I've always thought about culture, and it's an old adage, is it's the way things are done around here. And that is very much driven top down in terms of from senior leadership. Often the CEO sets the tone around what the culture is. And so, you know, you can influence it in any way. Culture can actually work the other way around as well. So you can have behaviours that are created through teams or departments, so that if you don't have that senior leadership role, you can still do the right thing. And when I say the right thing, my North Star is always by the customer. So what's the value and why are we here and what we do? If you're doing those things right, and you can influence the whole organisation from any one place. But yes, ultimately the whole organisation's culture will be driven from senior leadership and their behaviours. And yeah, I always think of small things as well, like kind of what's the real thing is, do we have a meeting after the meeting or before the meeting? Those sorts of things. If that's occurring, those are red flags to me that we haven't actually spoken about what needs to be spoken about, or it's not been done in the right way. So those are early indicators for me that there's things that need to be fixed in a different place.
That's a really great example, and I think very hard to tackle that topic. Have you got any examples of where any of you have confronted a situation and called out that behaviour?
Well, I'll just carry on with that, which is I always call it out if I can. I'll say, why didn't we talk about that in the meeting to that person? But in a nice way, I'll say, you know, that's a really important point. Why didn't we bring that up? How do we get that back in there? What's the thing that's stopping you from voicing that? Because I think it's either great, or I might think that it's not necessarily helpful, but then I have an indication that that person's in a different place. And then I try to understand more about why they're there in that space around thinking about that, whether it's a personal bias or, just where they're at that particular point in time.
And, you know, we talked about the vortex of that culture. Have you got examples or tips that you can give when you're thinking about disengagement or you're starting to feel really frustrated? How do you not lose your cool?
I think it's important to understand, I think, where the organisation's at any one given point in time. So, you know, Tom and I both have worked recently in the tech sector. It's been hard for tech companies in the last couple of years, kind of coming out of COVID. And I think that's had, sort of general repercussions on everybody in organisations. And so Asana did a recent study on, the anatomy of a workplace, and they identified that 7 out of 10 of their respondents had suffered burnout in 2021. And the core reasons for that burnout, or the drivers for that burnout, was around working way too many hours. The second one was just around not being able to switch off from work, because we're working in this distributed environment and everyone can access me whenever they want, and I get Slack notifications in the middle of the night. And last one, which I think is super important, is around a lack of role clarity. So I don't know exactly what success looks like for me and my role, and therefore my team doesn't know what that looks like, and therefore that shows in the results. So I think organisations really need to start thinking about what are the things that are driving cultures that we don't love in our workplaces, and looking at some of the data points in your organisation. So are you running an employee engagement survey? Have you had anecdotal feedback from people in the organisation that you should actually be listening to? Who do you have who's got sort of ears and eyes on the ground that can help you understand what's actually going on in the organisation? I think they're really important things for leadership, for anybody in the organisation to start to pay attention to, so that you can start to put in the right actions to sort of reverse or to improve your level of culture.
How about you, Tom?
How we don't lose cool, that's the question, right?
That is the question.
Yeah, I think that from my side, there's a couple of things that we look to do. So I always try in a situation where there is, I guess, pieces that maybe I don't necessarily agree with as part of like a kind of a workplace politics scenario. I try as much as I possibly can to make sure that there aren't these kind of little distributed conversations going on. So I think a big thing that I like to do, and probably guilty of what Anton said before around having meetings post the meeting at different stages, but sometimes you do need to, I feel, just kind of bring everyone back together. Often you'll have the meeting and I'll find that then you'll get like different people having conversations with you. I didn't agree with this, I agree with this, whatever else. And I often find that from my side, there's a need to just bring that all back in and just go, I'm getting this from you, I'm getting this from you. Let's just all have a conversation, let's let it out, and then let's be done with it from there. And just really make sure then that I guess we let the people talk. And I always find something I'm really trying to do as part of this as well is I try to speak last in any of these conversations as well. And the reason being that I think in a smaller organization, when you've got the founders who are bringing up their thoughts, it's very easy for that to then sway the opinion of everyone else. So whatever it is, whether it's voting on a proof or it's coming up with a decision, I want to hear from everybody else, and then also almost have to be prompted to speak before I actually kind of give my own thoughts on that. And I found that to be a really great way of then making sure that you're not buying into this culture of one person then really gets to sway how others are doing that, because that I feel can be then really disseminated down into your mid-level managers who then feel like they've got that same level of control. And we want to make sure that everyone's feeling like they're being heard and that we're having these really unified discussions there.
I love that you said that because you're modelling that behaviour. So you sort of staying silent, the gravitas that you have. So that's a great response. I
think also just to add to that point, because I think that it's just so important to understand like the impact that you as an individual have on a room. It doesn't matter what your role is, whether you're a CEO, whether you're someone else in the organisation. And I think back to the question of how do you not lose your cool. That's also a real huge opportunity for anybody to bring that room back to the right temperature that it needs to be. And that doesn't have to be from the CEO, that can be anybody. If tensions are rising and we're not getting to the right outcome, anybody in that room should feel empowered to say, hey, let's pause on this, or we don't have the right data to make this decision right now. And I think that can be a real superpower for anybody who is willing to sort of, step up into that space and say, hey, I'm not okay with this meeting or the culture that this meeting is, being conducted in, and I'm going to help change the vibe of that.
Yeah, I'll add to that. And you've just brought up another. So I'll give you a quick scenario, and this is also a different cultural sort of background in terms of it was in England or in London. And so I'm born in South Africa. I think I'm quite transparent in what I think, and I went into this new position, a transformation piece as well, and didn't realise that the way that you confront these things needs to be different in different scenarios, and that came to the fore in a stand-up meeting, if you want to call it that, where the CEO really drove the discussion and everybody just agreed. And that wasn't what I was used to. So I challenged a question in the meeting around, something I wanted a bit of discussion in the room with, and that didn't go down well. And that was good for me to be able to reflect on the way I approach, engaging in those discussions. And what he would have preferred in that instance was having a chat with him personally afterwards and not being confronted in the meeting, because he felt as though that was taking away from his power in that instance. But you have to be able to reflect on these things and just, it turns out good in the end, but you have to be able to go, oh, hang on, nobody actually said to me, don't do that. But I realised, hang on, people just don't actually confront the CEO in meetings or ask a different question. They just take it as the status quo. And that was really the reason, I suppose, I was put into that, was to kind of ask different questions. I didn't know that at the time, but that was, I was planted in there. But that's the self-reflection is really important through these, because your own bias or opinion or way of doing things needs to change sometimes, depending on the situation. And that comes later on when you're in these more senior roles, where you get to reflect on those and think about how you do it differently. But in terms of taking it personally or not blowing up, it's always about the work. It's not about it being personal for me. So that's kind of how I approach conversations.
Good call. I think if you get really practical, the byproduct of an overly political environment is, look, it can impact shifting strategic priorities or business growth. And one of the doozies is always balancing long and short-term growth. Have you got any tips for how to manage that well in an organisation?
I can start. Yeah, I mean, it's something it's something where really actively my co-founder Dom and I are always looking at ways we can do that better, because we find ourselves often just getting stuck in the weeds in the operational side of what needs to get done, putting out fires, dealing with the short-term problems. And so, I mean, one thing that we've tried to implement this year, which is working really effectively for us, is we basically do a bit of a pulse check on this every week. We set out, these are our kind of high-level strategic priorities of things that we need to ensure that we're meeting, and then we check in every week on how we're going with those. And these are often things that really, to be honest, they never have an impact on the short term of the business. It's always thinking ahead to what are these steps that we need to be taking around, what do we need to do in terms of having our financial modelling ready? What do we need to do in terms of having this certain arm of our strategy ready, and making sure that we've got those pieces in order in line with what we're doing with our BAU, because you can just always find yourself busy. It's so easy. You can feel in a role like ours, you can fill your week up so easily with things that you do, and you get to the end of the week and you're exhausted, but then you think, well, I'm not thinking ahead to then how I'm going to be able to make that bigger impact on our staff. And you kind of learn very quickly that once you go from your shorter, when you have a smaller team, people are maybe a bit more motivated around your short-term results, your commercials or whatever else. But you have to then start getting people to buy into this bigger picture for people who maybe haven't been on the journey for as long as you, maybe aren't as motivated by the commercials as you would like them to be, or whatever else. So you need to make sure that you're helping them to be able to articulate the strategy and then get them to buy into that strategy as well. So it's an important thing to do, and I think you've just got to, from my side, it's always making time, putting it in your calendar to say this is something that we're going to do, and then keeping yourself accountable to that. And I think that'd be really difficult without a co-founder. I will be honest in my side of what I found in that, but I guess everyone's different in how they're motivated.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, yes, like strategy planning, looking at the short term, looking at the long term, organisations really need to do, it's a two-speed organisation at any one time. So one is the operations, like how are we running financially? Are our customers happy? Are we keeping that churn to a reasonable level? All the kind of key metrics, and that's really running the business. But you've got to be able to, chew and, walk and chew gum at the same time, right? So the executive team should be focused on that long term, but we can't let that distract from our short term goals. And so I think, and again, I've worked in startups where I think we change the process every year. Like, I don't think we did it the same at any one point of time. And even in corporations that have been around for 50 years, you're always iterating that process, because you want to make sure that, yes, you are focused on that short-term goal, but who's accountable for those results? And I think being really clear on that, and making sure that there is sort of, one person that you can point to say, right, well, why is this up or down, and how can we make it either better, or, what else do we need to do? And then I think we've got to be thinking constantly about the sustainability of businesses and of the business, and how we think about our competitors, the market landscape, all of that kind of thing. But being really choiceful around who you have in that conversation and what inputs you need from the business to be able to make smart strategic decisions, at the right time for the organisation as well. So it's always a balance. I think it's hard to get that right. Yeah.
How about you, Anton? Short and long term.
Well, I'll get a little technical on this one, if I may. So I kind of go back to the data on this one, which is really important to kind of make decisions. So I think about things around customer lifetime value, and I think around if you've been able to segment your customers. Now, firstly, every organisation wants to have a lifetime value of their customers, and often they don't. But the value in having it to make these kind of decisions is invaluable. So you can then understand the segmentation of your high, medium and low value customers, and think about that as your kind of North Star, getting more people into the high value bucket, and then creating those journeys between the low value or new customers into getting them into the high value bucket. What that allows you to do is think long term and short term, because you can then break that down into prioritisation around products and around the activities that are supporting each of those areas. So then the whole business can really make better decisions around where to focus their attention at which points, because acquisition is always going to be an important thing for every business, but often businesses get caught up in the short term and spend a lot of time and effort there because it's really important. But if they understand that it takes X amount of time to get that person to high value, that's the medium to longer term often, and they can think about what that means and what they're doing now and how it's contributing to 3-5 years. Many businesses create 5-year plans and they never actually look at anything past year 1 or 2 at the most. And so there's no real value in doing that if you're not actually serious about thinking about the long term as well.
I love how you're calling out the customer experience and the customer really being the anchor of that growth. I want to switch gears to look at the positive. And, politics is essentially coming from people. And we're really lucky to be working with diverse teams and diverse people who all have very different ways of working, opinions, roles, and working styles. How do you better close the gap and understand where other people are coming from? Sandy, I might start with you.
Yeah, look, I think taking a good hard look at your values in the organisation, and do you have them written on the wall, or is it something that you live and breathe every day? And in every decision that you are making, is it aligned to sort of a common set of values that everyone can kind of point to and say, yeah, I'm living those values in this organisation? I truly believe that people don't try and create bad cultures on purpose. It's not something that anybody wants to rock up to work and be like, great, I'm really excited to have a shit day today. No one wants that. And so it's often thinking about how, for me personally, I think it's about making sure, how am I getting the best out of this person or this team? So if you're actively going in there and making someone feel a little rubbish about the work that they've done, and you're not providing the right level of feedback or critique that is going to be helpful in a future result, then you probably haven't done your job very well that day. And so I think just really reflecting on your own way of how you're managing teams and people and leading them is really critical to sort of help uplift the organisation. I think we do have to also, get better at being exceptional leaders in the organisation. So there is, when there's a bad culture in an org, everyone's gossiping, everyone's sort of having these very low-level conversations. And I think you've always just got to elevate. What's the better conversation to be having right now? And I've been guilty of it before, where you might actually be like, yeah, that was really shit what that person did, or, and you're kind of encouraging that conversation. But we're all leaders. Everyone is a leader in organization. Like, you all have this ability to be able to uplift a conversation, and that can go a really long way. So I would encourage businesses and individuals to be thinking about, how can I uplift every situation that I'm in an organisation? And that can very quickly turn a culture around.
Can I add one more layer to that and say we have very diverse teams. So, if I think about my past being marketing background, talking to technology, it's like talking English and Japanese. And then you've got the cultural layer as well. I mean, Tom, you as a co-founder would have a diverse mix of people. How do you speak to them and motivate them in different ways?
I think that there's, from like a kind of a one-to-one level, that I think there's such an importance on just that, having one-to-ones with people and having a good regular cadence to that. And I know early days of Lawpath, we didn't do that particularly well. It was just, we might catch up with people just kind of a bit more ad hoc and sporadically. But now it's something that we really build into, whether it's a weekly or a fortnightly piece, to having those conversations. And so that, I think that's really important to do, because that gives you the opportunity. And often the one thing with a one-on-one is a lot of people think it's my chance to go through and say, this is your task list, let's tick off everything on where that's at. There's usually an element involved in there, I'm not going to lie, but also it's meant to be an opportunity for you really to say, how are you feeling about things? What's your workload looking like? I often use it as a way to say, like, let's talk about this that happened this week. What do we think, like, in terms of how we could have done that better? From my side, to kind of really understand people's perspectives, I really like to also sometimes tell them how I would have done it after hearing how they would have done it, just to kind of hear why they have approached it in a different way. And that's not to say my way is the right way of doing it, but it's more to understand why people have done things a certain way. Maybe it's because of a past organization where they've worked, maybe there's a difference in their styles or whatever else. The other thing that we do is we have a thing called a user manual that we do on every single staff member. So when you join Lawpath, you complete a series of questions which basically asks, how do you like to be communicated with? What is the best way of being able to provide feedback to you? And we get every staff member to complete that, so that then you can use that as a way, if you don't deal with somebody particularly regular and maybe they're very abrupt or very short in how they're communicating with you, it gives you a bit of a way of them being able to look back and say, oh, I haven't insulted them, or I haven't aggravated them. That's just their style. And understanding that is then making sure that then you've got that in a way of being able to communicate that across. And then the one other thing I would say is that it's often good to have these kind of skip meetings at different times. I find is a really useful part of that as well. Not completely you're not trying to do it to undermine the mid-level managers, but often it's a way just of making sure that you're having the opportunity to hear from everybody else and kind of empathize with the decisions that they're making and the difficulties that they're having as well. So I think it's just trying to find that time to kind of get those qualitative feedback loops versus just solely relying, I guess, on the summaries, the cliff notes, the quantitative measures that you have.
Yeah. Any final thoughts from you, Anton?
Yeah, there's so different types of engagement in that way. So in meetings, in that a North Star of a purpose and the strategy in terms of what we're talking about, is it contributing to any one of those particular things in the strategy? But when it's one-on-one meetings, I think to your point, it's less about what we're doing and it's more about how are you and what's important to you this week and what are you working on, how are things at home, because everybody is there to do the thing from the organisation's perspective, but they have a real world outside of what they're doing, and that's influencing a lot of what they're thinking and the decisions they're making. And often I find that that's the root cause for some things that might cause problems later on, if there's stuff not going well in people's personal lives or things that they're happening outside of work that you need to be cognizant of. If that's direct reports, that's really good to have that rapport and understanding. If it's anybody else, the opportunity to just sit down with somebody in the organisation and ask them, how's your week going? What's your focus? What are the things? What do you think about this thing that we're doing in this place? And just getting everybody else's thoughts on those changes or projects or things that are going on is invaluable for a litmus test of what's going on in the business. So yeah, it's that for me is the kind of way I like to operate, and just ask questions and then listen more, I think.
You're also showing humanity and just being a human being, right? And caring about your staff, and it gives them permission to then open up. So I appreciate that answer.
It's worth mentioning and I think I found this over the last few years is that, and especially with the difficulty that a lot of organisations are going through, where they'll be really purpose and values driven, and that's how they recruit and kind of how the mantra and how they talk. But then they'll go through a layoff, and a lot of people will need to leave the organisation, and that kills a lot about what we say and what we do. There's a big difference between that, and that's a really hard situation. I think people have switched off a bit into the purpose-driven thing and feeling as though, do you really care about me? Because you'll say this, but then I know that we've just lost a whole bunch of people. And that's, from a cultural perspective, and back into politics and all the rest of it, can be a massive driver of things that are happening in one place that you can't, really hard to go back into and build that culture back up. That, without giving the answer to it, but I think very much, if the organisation is transparent about, and everybody realises why they're there and what value looks like, those sorts of things are easier, but they're not easy.
100%.
Probably would just also add to that, just two practical things that companies can do is have a think about your decision-making framework. I often find that a lot of the side conversations or, when issues manifest is because no one's made the decision. We don't all have a Tom in the room that can make a decision, and that's, and so sometimes I think just reflecting on how decisions are being made in the organisation, are they being made by the right person, and do you have the right input, is really critical. And so, one of the founders at Ship once said to me, and will always remain with me, he said, there's very few decisions that cannot be reversed. So, there's very few unreversible decisions out there. So he was saying, I was mulling over something one day and he said, just make a decision. Even if it's the wrong one, it doesn't matter. We can fix that. And so I think, having a review of what that decision-making framework looks like is really important for organisations. And secondly, I would just say is, culture can be a very simple thing to create. Often you can hear businesses say, what's Netflix culture like? Or Amazon, how have they done that? But really it boils down to just very simple rituals and behaviours that anyone can employ at any one time. And so I think if you're kind of struggling with toxic workplace cultures and you're seeing that in your organisation, just have a reflect around, what are your cadences like? How do we show up every morning? Like, what's the first thing that we do when we come to work? Reviewing those, I think, is often just, and implementing a few things can often just really have a huge impact on the culture of the org.
I like that. So if you don't know an organisation and you're interviewing for a position, you don't know those inner machinations. If you were to give advice to anyone as they're going through an interview process, how do you kind of identify those toxic cultures? What are the signals that people need to look out for? Start with you, Anton.
Look, I mean, the obvious thing is to go and look at things like Glassdoor and look at what anonymous people who've worked at the organisation say about it. But then if you're actually in the interview process, it's great to be able to, because the interview is happening both ways. And so the kind of questions that are being asked, if they're not the usual textbooks one, it's often how it's asked, or the question, the follow-up question that comes from it. And then obviously when you get to the end of the interview and you get that opportunity to ask questions yourself, you can kind of delve into areas where you might have concerns. But I mean, you can definitely get a good vibe and a good sense of an organisation's culture pretty quickly, even if it's only a few people you're talking to. And it often is how the brand represents itself.
Even the interview process. Any other tips?
Yeah, probably from, I guess, more side of, people maybe we've brought in and kind of understanding when there hasn't maybe been a good alliance in fit for both us as the culture that we create and then the expectations of individuals as well. I think in part of the interview process, you really need to, from both sides, have just some outlines on what your non-negotiables are and what are some really important parts of your workplace culture. A classic one that is around people's like flexible work arrangements, right? If you are coming into an organization, you should really understand where their stance is on that and just make sure that you're really having that articulated for you, because often you'll have an expectation that, well, everyone allows us to work from home or whatever it is, but then there are still organizations that have much more, stricter kind of ideas of coming in office, and that's an expectation maybe in the early stages of your role. So you really need to understand what that is like and stress test that a little bit. Maybe just say, this is what a typical week would look like for me, where I'm doing kids pickups or whatever else, and how would we work around that? Because often I hear from colleagues and from peers and from other founders or whatever else, where those expectations aren't really matching on both sides. And I think that's something that you have to make sure is very, very clear, that you're kind of going through that process and asking. The other one would be, for every role, from both the interviewer side and the interviewee side, you really need to have a clear idea of what the first 3 months is going to look like. And that sounds really simple and something you should always do, but it's often not. As someone's got, we need this role filled. And often, to be honest, they might have like one short-term task they've got in mind for what that is. And they go, we need this all the time. Things come up, so that's what it's going to be like. And we found that, we make, for whatever hiring requests we get, we must have a 90-day plan of, this is what they're going to be working through, the projects they're going to be involved in, the people that they're going to be interacting with. And you need to give that across to them as well, so that they can make sure that their expectations are met in what they are thinking the role is going to be like. And then the other thing I would say is just do a mystery shop if you can. If there's an opportunity to just, if you get a chance, if it's consumer facing or whatever else, if there's a chance to actually just go through what it looks like from a customer side of things, I feel like, from a branding perspective, brand is often so easily kind of construed from what is customer facing, and then that also really then disseminates into how employer brand and how the culture is internally as well.
100%.
Yeah, I think that was probably key for me, was the customer engagement. So your employee engagement's only ever going to be as good as your customer engagement. So how well is the brand represented? How good is the product that is on offer? And how happy are the customers? So if you go through any kind of Google reviews and you see, the customer support was terrible, I couldn't get a hold of anybody, I couldn't do blah, then that can often be a sign that there might be some underlying issues in the organisation as well around those particular areas. So I think just being really, I'm super proud of the companies I've worked for in the past, and have really been an advocate, whether I'm working inside that business or not, being an advocate of that product, because I really believe in that product. And ultimately, that's what you want your employees to do. You want them to believe in a product that you're selling to the masses. So I think that is a really key part that can help you understand how that org might be operating at any one time.
Pride in your workplace, 100%.
They're so important for me. The double-edged sword on brand is both employee and customer, and the employee journey is as important as the customer journey in the way it's mapped out, because those out of 200 people that will apply for one role, 199 won't get it, and they're also customers of yours. And if you haven't treated them extremely well through that process and been transparent and open in your communication, that's how you treat your customers as well.
I have one more question for you all. What does thriving in your work life mean to you? Start with you, Anton.
Well, the obvious piece around work-life balance. So being able to switch off from work if possible, and concentrate on the other things in my life that are really important. But often the roles that I'm in are all consuming, so you never switch off. But the trick is, for me, is to be able to kind of delineate that as much as possible, and also not put that onus on the people that are reporting into me at that point, so that they can also switch off. Because if I'm getting hold of them at all times and hours and that, they're probably not having a great work-life balance as well. So that's an important aspect to me, and that helps me just thrive in all parts of my life.
Great. Sandy?
Oh, thriving, that's such a big one. But I think for me, thriving is just, is another word for energy management in my life. I think we've all got young kids here around the table, so there's many things that you have to manage at any one time. But I think, thriving for me is feeling like I've got a lot of energy to give to a project or a work or to a colleague that might need my support at any one time, but then I'm also giving the same level of energy to other parts of my life. If at any one time that is depleted in one area, so if I'm not feeling it at work, then I need to go and have a chat to someone who can help me resolve that. So I think just being super self-aware of the things that are bringing you up and bringing you down, and then working through that is, for me, what a thriving life looks like.
How about you, Tom?
Yeah,
thriving.
The word that comes to mind for me is progress, and I think that I kind of look at when I feel like I'm thriving in a kind of a work-life environment is when there's progress in one of those areas, right? So it's all well and good to think that you're always going to have this dynamic role where there's always new opportunities that you're going to tackle, and that's probably what we're all aiming to have, is that, not every day is the same. There's new challenges that are faced all the time, but often that's not the case. Sometimes you have to just head down working through similar types of problems that you might feel like you're having to tackle similar things each day. So then I always look at when there are those situations where there are maybe lulls from like a kind of a work opportunities perspective for both my staff and myself personally, what are we kind of doing to fill that void of progress in other aspects? So whether that's saying, are there any opportunities for you to go and do some further learning and development? Are there, I know from myself personally, it's then saying, what are some things that I've always wanted to do from a personal perspective, taking on some sort of a new challenge, try something I've never done before, and take that on. And it could be something very simple, like I went in a float tank for the first time the other week, and that was something that was very different, I suppose, as simple as that is, or something like that.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was okay. Don't know if I'll be back.
Yeah.
But
you tried it.
Exactly. So it's kind of having those areas there where you're saying, there is something that is new and exciting for me to look forward to, and you would hope that it's revolving around your work, but when it isn't, you can then look at saying, what am I doing from a personal perspective to feel like I have that sense of progress as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, sharing your stories. Appreciate your transparency as well. I hope you found the panel as enjoyable as I did. Thanks so much for your time, team.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.